Hi, it's Rachel. I'm going to do a very short video on topping your tomatoes in the fall and why you want to do it. Topping refers to removing the main growth tips from the stems of your tomatoes. I'm a little late doing this. Typically, you should go through about 30 days before your first frost in the fall. The reason is that from the day a tomato blossom is pollinated until the day you have fruit can be anywhere from 28 days to the cherry types, all the way to like 60 days if it's a larger slicer. And when you have your first frost, the whole plant is probably gonna die. So our goal is to get all of the fruit that we have to be as ripe as we can before that first frost. My first frost is in like 2.5 weeks, my predicted first frost, so I'm late. But even if the fruits have a little bit of color, I can usually get them to ripen up just fine inside. So I am still gonna go through and do this today. I'm gonna quickly show you what that looks like, but it's not all that complicated. As is typical for me this time of year, I have totally let this tomato trellis get away from me, so honestly it's a good idea to go through and prune it anyway. You can kind of see I'm getting little spots and issues in here, so I do want to take care of that and prune. And while I am at it, I will go through and top all of my tomatoes. You can kind of see this tomato has thrown off this whole sucker. It's got some flowers on it, but those don't have time to ripen, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that whole thing off. If I have another stem that has, as an example, unripe tomatoes on it, I will definitely keep those on the plant and only cut the growth tips that are past that point. Showing you guys the fun part. Like any tomato pruning, I recommend a dry day with a bit of a breeze. It helps those pruning cuts heal quicker, and also sterilize your pruners ahead of time to further help with the prevention of disease transmission. You're going to want to do this in several passes as opposed to trying to kind of move efficiently down it. And the reason is if you remove the leaves first, I find that it really helps to, at least for me, to see where the fruiting clusters are and to make sure that I only cut the growing tips that are past that first fruiting cluster. It's also just easier to avoid knocking tomatoes off, although you'll see later I didn't totally manage that. As you can see from the aftermath, this was a really serious, hard pruning. It did, oh, it's perfect here, but definitely I think it did what I was trying to do. Try and point here. You can see like that used to have little new growth tips coming off. I cut all of those off, and I tried to leave and save all of the fruit that's on here. So a good example. All right, so this coming up had a fruiting cluster that had set some fruit, so I left that, but I cut the growing tip just past that. So I tried to do that everywhere that I could, and now hopefully these tomatoes will focus all of their energy into ripening that fruit. I topped this volunteer tomato while I was at it. You can see here, that was my cut. And I realized, I don't think I told you guys about this one. This is a mysterious volunteer tomato that self-planted itself outside of this bed, and in a just lovely piece of serendipity, a borage pollinator plant also volunteered right next to it, so I've just tucked them up on the trellis together. And I have no idea what kind of tomato this is. I was growing Dr. Weishi's yellow in this bed last year, and what is coming up now, you can't tell because I already picked the ripe ones, but these are red as they ripen. But I like this, it's cool. They're like 1.5 inches diameter. I'm getting clusters of 6 tomatoes at a time. I think this is some weird natural hybrid, a cross of tomatoes I was growing last year, because I certainly didn't put a tomato transplant out here, and it's not a Dr. Weishi's. So I don't know, birds, squirrels, somebody took a ripe tomato that had been a cross and dropped it down in the ground. This thing literally just grew up by itself. The one thing I did do was I kind of shoved a little fertilizer spike in the ground next to it to give it a little bit of help. That was it. And it did well. So I'm gonna save seeds from this one and see if I can get it stable after a few generations, and maybe I'll have a new cool tomato. I do try to be careful, but it seems like every year I inadvertently knock off a bunch of tomatoes in the process. So I am gonna take these guys inside. Most of them have no color at all, but I'll bring them in, I'll put them in a sealed container, and with any luck, they'll still ripen. Voila, topped tomatoes. I do recommend that you do this. It can be psychologically difficult, especially when you're having a warm fall and it still feels like maybe you could get more tomatoes. But remember, it is better to have some lovely, ripe, edible tomatoes than lots and lots of frozen, mushy, green, inedible tomatoes. So keep that as your mantra and fearlessly top your fall tomatoes. As I mentioned, I am late in doing this. With any luck, we'll have a warm fall. I'm keeping my eye on the weather forecast, and whenever our first frost is expected, I will come out here, I will pick whatever is on the vines and ripen it indoors, and that'll be the end of my tomato season. As always, hope that was helpful. I did promise I'd keep doing garden tips, so here you go. I will do the next video, I think, on the permaculture lot site plan. So zone 1, that'll come up next. Thanks, good luck.